My interest was starting a company that had what I called unlimited potential that would allow me to become as big as my energy and my money was. I can ship anywhere in the country. I'm not limited. In my mind, I couldn't fail. I stayed focused on being the best worm casting producer, the most cost-effective producer. I used to call it the 3 Bs: best price, best product, and best service. Your guys' structure was exactly what I was looking for, where I could make the deal. They just put me in touch with parties, and within weeks I got calls and contacts of people, and one of them was the guy that ended up buying it. That was a good time to sell. Our profits were up. We were number one in the industry. Our label was number one in the industry. Put aside any of the reasons that I personally wanted to sell, it also was a good time.
Today I'm sitting here in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin with Tom Chapman, the premier vermiculture businessman, a Rejigg modern industrialist who's built an amazing business. It's probably the business I talk about more than any other one that we've worked with. And I'm sitting here in his amazing garage with all the things that he's been able to acquire on the strength of his awesome business. What business did you build?
I built an organic fertilizer manufacturing company using earthworms to produce the organic fertilizer, which is basically their shit. So it sounds simple on the surface, but it's a process of maintaining controls and every aspect of their life: temperatures, moistures, quantities of worms per quantities of material that they're going to eat, as we refer to as bedding. So it's a scientific thing, science behind what feeds we're feeding and stuff. But on the surface, we're just getting worms to shit, separating it, packaging it, and selling it.
It's an unusual company. Its name is Unco Industries, and we're here to talk all about it. You want to talk about the very start of the business? Kind of what inspired you to actually start an earthworm company?
I never thought about starting an earthworm company. My interest was starting a company that had what I called unlimited potential that would allow me to become as big as my energy and my money was or available to me. So when I heard about worms and the organics, I can ship anywhere in the country. I'm not limited. A buddy of mine, for example, had started a fast food restaurant. At the end of the day, he can't get on the phone and call a guy in Rhode Island and sell him a burger plate special and ship it to him. So he's limited by what he can draw in a local area. My business was not. I could get on the phone and I could make a call. So it wasn't, can I sell it? It was more a question of, will it take me 100 calls or 500 calls to achieve the sale goals I want? But I have unlimited, millions of people and accounts to potentially contact. So that's what made me think of this industry. And it was, other big part was, it wasn't a big investment. I wasn't spending $10 million to start the business. I could become a professional with a lot less money because I didn't have any damn money.
How did you think about all that stuff when you were 17 years old? Like it's like when I was 17, I was thinking about who am I going to ask to prom? That was the big question.
I have to admit that I committed myself for 3 years to not get into a serious relationship, because serious relationships take time if they're and I didn't want to commit to them. My mom even got nervous that no girls like me because I date a lot of women, but I didn't date them for more than 2 dates. It was committed to the business. I didn't want to get serious because I was committed for a 3-year period to get to a certain level before I started looking for a serious relationship.
And how did you know that at 17 you wanted to kind of build this thing that had this national reach? I know the story here, but talk a little bit about sort of the wind up to starting Unco.
I knew that I wanted something, and when I started, Unco, I think it was achieving it gave me ability to have a company that could achieve the goals. And when we started with the worms, I realized early on it was pretty unprofessional. There was now no knowledge to, what was happening. You didn't know how much inventory you had. You didn't know what your cost was, your raw materials. And you can't run a business with that. I was no genius, but I was smart enough to realize I better know what the hell my costs are, and I better know what my inventory is. And it was somewhat mind-boggling because I didn't think of myself as a smart guy, but then you see the rest of the people that are in this industry at that, when I got in, that don't realize they think they have millions of worms, and they don't know how many worms they have in a bin. They don't know what their costs are. Their castings are half dirt and half worm castings, and they were clueless. And some of them were scientist guys that are in here, and they saw this stuff. So I realized early on that two things were happening. Vermicomposting, which is using worms for waste disposal, was going to be that market. It wasn't taking off in a big commercial way, one. And two, if it was, no one would have ever had worms, because that system, the beds and windrows didn't work. It didn't do the numbers they said, and it didn't have the controls that I talked about. So I made a decision to find a better way. And I went out looking for other guys, thinking there would be somebody out there with better way. And at that time, it wasn't like you go on the internet and punch it up and find other worm
Sure.
farmers. It was a chore to find people in different parts of the country. But I traveled and met 5-6 people, and they were dumber than I was, and they'd been doing it for years. And
this is you're kind of mentioning, just to paint the picture, is like you and I were talking last night at dinner, and it was like this is kind of like the Ponzi scheme-esque, like people selling the worms to other folks. Like, just paint the picture a little bit of like what the ecosystem looked like at that point.
At that time, and I didn't really know until I started talking to these people about buying, and this is before what we talked about. This is right when I started. So I realized early on that they were talking guaranteed markets. Will buy whatever you produce, but you don't have to commit to anything. And I said, how can anyone do that? How can you create a market for something you don't know how much product you're going to get from one month to the other? How do you even know how many employees or how big of a facility to have if you don't know how much product you're going to have to deal with? So there's no way they could live up to this promise. They were just using that promise to sell naive people into the business. So I knew they were lying to me. Now, I don't know if I was smarter or dumber than the average guy, because I knew they're lying to me, but I still bought their program. And then I found out they were lying to me about the system. And I don't think they were lying to me consciously. They just didn't know the system didn't work because they didn't care. And that's what, brought me, out, was to develop a better process, and where we left off. And I spent a couple years doing that, experimenting. I met a guy during my research that was 40 or 50 miles away named Tom Stublinski. Older guy, had been mucking around in his backyard. He used to be an alcoholic, and when he stopped drinking, the day the man walked on the moon, he committed himself to dicking around after his job.
He saw the
worms.
newscast of like Buzz and Neil on the moon, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to stop, put the bottle down, and
I don't know
focus
why
on
he
worms.
stopped drinking, but
What a day!
And, but he was a get your hands dirty type, meticulous guy. I was big picture, big vision, get it done guy, and so we fit well together. Because
you were like 20 at this time, or
probably
early 20s?
19. Yeah.
Okay.
We started working together. I had this building. He had was working out of his house. Had 9 kids. There were worm beds in between some of their beds in their in their bedroom.
In the house, there's worms
in the
running
basement
around.
bedroom. Yeah, so the basement was the worm farm.
Was
and
his
there's
wife
stuff.
okay with it? Like,
His
I
wife
guess,
was evidently, yeah.
Yeah.
He was making extra money. He was very instrumental in helping develop the Unco System. I brought in the big picture ideas, like I want to know my inventory, my cost. I want to produce a pure product, blah, blah, blah. And between him and a entomologist guy we brought on from Parkside, those were the 3 key
is
people.
Parkside a
local university
Okay.
in Kenosha. And once we committed to it, we just did a lot of experimenting, different beddings, different feeds. And even one day a guy came to me and asked what our formula was, and he was a scientist. He said, there's a lot of science behind your feed formula. And I remember thinking, shit, I thought he just threw some shit together and stuff, but maybe he's smarter than I thought, because the science, different proteins, decomposing at different times made it valuable. I forget all the technical talk.
So you're running like a bunch of batches at a time, and you're just measuring like how much product these earthworms produce.
In the beds, they were just throwing material on top, and then you would harvest over time. Once the Unco system was implemented, we would take the certain amount of worms, put them into a container with a certain amount of bedding. So we control the amount of worms, the amount of bedding, the length of time, proper moisture, temperatures, which gave us control of all aspects to get maximum consistent,
so
calculatable
there is real
results.
science going into
There's
this
definitely
thing.
science to it. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, part of what I wanted to develop in this process was the fact that the work part could be done by somebody that doesn't know a whole hell of a lot. And, you could teach a new guy how to do the work in 10 minutes. He doesn't have to understand the whole process. He just has to understand what he has to do to feed the worm.
And one of the things that you and I were just talking about is like the sort of thing I think that you do, which is like you make these really fast decisions sort of like on the fly. And you're very comfortable making these decisions and balancing that against kind of this strategic planning that you've, kind of developed over the years. When you were 19, did you have all that stuff in place already, or how much of this was sort of like, on the fly versus like strategically thought out ahead of time?
I mean, I think that I had it in place, but I didn't know I had it. A friend of mine said, are you going to go and do some of these marketing seminars and learn some stuff? And I said, yeah, I plan to, but I haven't been to any of them. And he said, well, you don't need to. He said, I've been to all of them, and you're like teaching them. You're doing everything. So at that time, I started to realize, well, how the hell am I doing everything when I didn't ever learn it? So that may have been the first time that I started to realize, I don't want to say I was different, but, that I had some skills, relative to those things.
Well, you also, at 15 and a half had some, practice, I think, doing some of this stuff. You want to talk a little about your first job, your only other job besides doing Unco?
Yeah. I was pretty much just nagging the company, which, it was a long bike ride too, to get to his place, to nag him 4 times a week. And eventually, he wouldn't even let me in his office, and I was bugging his secretary and started socializing, and he finally hollered out the door and said, give that asshole a job so he stops bugging me.
This is the gas station.
At the gas station. So I got a job, and 3 months later, they asked if I wanted to run another station and be the manager. And I'm like, sure. And then they told me that he would like me to fire everybody legally. And I'm like, he says, can you do that? I'm like, sure.
And you're 15 and a half, and the workers are...
They're older,
30s,
25s
20s,
and stuff, 30. I found ways to fire them. The first one, my mom had to drive me to work because I'm only 15 and a half. And I told her, I said, I'm going to go in, but you stay. And if I wave at you, then you can leave. But if I come running out and jump back in the car, take off. And she's like, what? I said, just do that. So I went in and fired this guy, and he started crying. So I figure I'm safe. He's not going to beat me up. So I let my mom leave. And then I proceeded to fire, 5 or 6 people. And I think I did it legally. Nobody got in trouble.
I haven't been sued to this day
Yeah,
for those of that. Even at 15 or 16 or 17, you had a lot of backbone. Like, you had a lot of this stuff. Like, where does that come from? Are your parents like that?
No, my dad was laid back. So I don't really know where it came from, I think. But I surely didn't learn it from my dad, no. If anything, my dad was an instrument in that he told me that I was an idiot. You shouldn't work for yourself. You don't work for yourself when you don't have any money. You don't get a regular job. You're out of the house. And I love my dad dearly. But, I think I maybe put a little extra effort in to prove, to him that he was, that I was not wrong, not, stupid or whatever you would call it.
Totally. A little chip on the shoulder.
Yeah, so it helped. And then I remember years later, we had a bowling team together, some of his friends and some of my friends, and people would say, Unco, what's that about? And he's, Unco, that's my son. He built that from nothing. And I'm thinking, you asshole.
And is this while you're still kind of in the... I assume that this is over the long arc of like, hey, he's just kind of worm farming guy, and then it moved into like the composting as you started to build the business up through your 20s and 30s.
Yeah, there was a time even for me that I decided to expand and borrow some money. And my dad got very irritated. He said, what is your problem? You start to make more money. You make more money than I make at the post office. You've got this, you got that, you got money, and now you want to go risk it all to get bigger. Why the hell would you do that? I thought you were stupid. You proved me wrong, but you didn't prove me wrong. You are stupid. Why the hell would you do that? And I said, because I want to get bigger. I said, borrowing money is only a risk in me, and I've already proved what I can do. So thanks for your, motivation. And I said, but, I didn't know at the time, but my mom signed the house because they used their house as collateral for this money, and he didn't ever
to give to you.
Yeah, he didn't. Well, they put the house up, and the bank gave me the money, and I looked at it as I could cut. If I failed totally, I could cut grass part time and have a full time job and still pay the loan back. So they weren't at risk. But he hadn't agreed to it, and Mom pushed it through, which I didn't know at the time.
That's a hell of a lot of faith Mom had.
Yeah. I was I would say I was a mama's boy, but she believed in me. She believed in all her kids.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And as kind of, maybe this is a good moment. It's kind of your dad is like, hey, you got all the stuff already. What more do you want? I look around here and there's a lot of stuff. That's cool in here. You want to talk a little bit about sort of the space that we're in right now?
Again, my dad was, came through, poverty and so on and so forth. So, when I started buying nicer cars, he's like, do you really need that? And I said, no, Dad, I don't need it. There's wants and there's needs. I said, everybody needs a car if they're going to travel around the city, but do they need a fancy car? No, that's a want. And you obviously don't need a fancy or want a fancy car because you have basic cars. He's like, well, why? I said, why anything? I don't know why. I said, I just want. That's why I'm willing to work harder, and he had less wants. He was happy just having a roof over his head. Sometimes I wished I could be like that.
But you never were. You always wanted more.
Yeah, people would say that you're never happy. Well, in business, if you have goals, everywhere you should be in life and in business, you have goals. So if your goal is to be here in X period of time and you're here, then, you get here, your goal is to be here. So it's not wanting more, it's wanting to achieve your goal. Some of the richest people in the world work. Look at our crazy president. Look at the time he's spending running the country. He's not doing it for money. Some of the richest guys still work harder than the average guy does, and they don't need the money. They're keeping score. It's not about money and that I need it. Or that I want to buy something more. It's about you have a goal and
achieving
and you
goals
achieve
and pushing.
That goal.
How did you set goals in the early days? Like, and maybe kind of correlated to that. Like, was there a moment early on where you're kind of like, oh, like this is actually going to be something someday versus like, I'm just trying to like kind of make it work?
I think that moment for me was when I started because I had no doubt.
From the very beginning, you were like, this is going to be a huge thing.
Yeah. And it was hard because many people that when you look at successful people, big success, they failed at one or two endeavors before they found their successful thing. So statistics were definitely against me, but I didn't, in my mind, I couldn't fail.
You just knew you couldn't.
I believed that, that it would succeed and that I was going to make it succeed. And it was tunnel vision. There was a lot of other things you could do, inside of the industry, but I stayed focused on being the best, even to this day, the best worm casting producer, the most cost-effective producer.
What does it mean to be the best? Is it a cost? Is it efficiency? Is it like the best product?
I think it's a combination of all of them. The best product in that we have the purest worm castings. We have the most unique manufacturing system that's cost-effective, so we can our costs are less than other people's. And then service. I used to call it the 3 Bs: best price, best product, and best service. And that was our motto. I
would love to kind of hear you talk through like kind of the history of expanding the business over time, because I know this used to be the actual factory, and now you're in a new facility. I think there's a few more before that.
Yeah. When I started with a friend of mine from high school. His dad had a dairy business, and he helped finance, our investment into the business. And then Dave and I, kind of ran it. Well, Dave was a dairy farmer, and Dave was working. And we worked together for a while doing the mucking, as I call it, part. But then as I started to get into the office, once I met this Stablaski and we started building the business and developed this system, I spent more time in the office. And Dave started getting irritated because I wasn't doing as much mucking.
When you say you moved into the office, you started living?
I started moving into office roles.
Oh, got it.
Doing administrative and doing marketing and so on and so forth. So I left him, doing production. And then as we continued to get organized, we started putting a value on an employee. Well, my value as the person running the company and doing the marketing, what I'm going to charge the company per hour was X, and Dave's was half of that, and he wasn't happy with that. But I could hire people for less than what the company was paying him. His profit was still the same when we took percentages of profit, but his hourly pay was less. And it was just another stepping stone of being organized and building the business. But sometimes, people get, unhappy or hurt and it affected our relationship a little bit. but it was what it was. Eventually I bought him out, and then I bought his dad out and owned the company by myself. Still rented from them, and they're like a second family to me. But from there, we expanded into this building, the two-story part of the building called the Bartlett School. I bought that, lived in it, and turned it into the worm farm.
I think we've talked a lot about sort of the start and kind of the early years here. Can you paint a picture of like what the business looked like last year? Sort of like just kind of paint the picture like what the business looks like last year.
I mean, in my opinion, that was a good time to sell. Our profits were up. We were number one in the industry. Our label was number one in the industry. So put aside any of the reasons that I personally wanted to sell, it also was a good time. And one thing to learn about business is many times it's timing. Timing's a big factor on when you make big decisions, do big things. And I felt the timing was right and for a sale. And then there was other reasons that I wanted to slow down, which I never really thought I would. But that was, was about timing for me. It was a good time and to get the right price.
Did you go into the process with like, I want a certain dollar value, or was it sort of like, this is a good time to sell and I'll take whatever can go out there? Like, just talk to me a little bit about your mindset going into like thinking.
I already had one of my vendors that was interested in buying, 80% of the company because I wanted to keep the kids involved, and he wanted the kids involved. But he was having a hard time putting together his own family structure. There was 4 brothers and kids involved, and they were trying to figure out who owns that company. So it was taking a while, and eventually he said, if you want to move on, go ahead and move on. It could be another year or 2 before we're figured out. And then your people had been calling me, and I liked the structure of how they did things where I could make the deal. They just put me in touch with parties. So when he called one time, and he had been pretty consistently calling, a good salesman, and I eventually said, hey, I'm not going to do anything, but I said, if you want to go to my website and pull some shit off there and make an ad and make a listing, and people call me, I said, fine. I don't know about your site. I've never been to your site. He said, well, I sent it to you. Didn't you go and look? You said you looked. I said, yeah, I say a lot of things. I said, I kind of look, but I never looked in depth. So if you want to put shit together for me, I said, help yourself. And within weeks, I got calls and contacts of people, and one of them was the guy that ended up buying it.
So what did you expect? So I think there's kind of a few things that we can talk about here. It's like Sam called you a bunch of times, and you brushed him off for a while.
I said, I'm interested in selling. I like your structure, but, I have a deal that, is I'm waiting on this guy. I think knowing salespeople, Sam was smart enough to know that this guy could fall through, so he'd stay in touch with me, and he asked if he could. And I said, you're gonna, whether I say yes or no, so sure, stay in touch with me. And lucky you did.
And I assume over the years you've had all kinds of brokers and bankers and kinds of people like reach out to you, and you've kind of said no to all of them.
Yeah, there was a different type of brokers that want to make the deal for you and want to do the negotiating and do everything and charge a high fee. Who knows the business better than me? I make deals, I put people in business. I'm selling businesses. So why would I want someone else to sell the biggest thing that I ever had, my business and the building? So I was not interested in any of those. But your guys' structure was exactly what I was looking for. Yeah. And it worked great.
When we were sitting in our old office, it was like this really beat up old office space in like downtown San Francisco, but it was probably hasn't been renovated in 30 years. And Sam hit the go button on Unco, and we all saw it come across like our Slack channel. I was like, vermiculture? What the hell is vermiculture? We looked it up, and we're like, we're gonna sell a worm farm? Like, who the hell's gonna buy this?
Yeah, exactly, just like I said, we're not impressed,
Yeah, well, we all looked it up, and like we sat us around for like 15 minutes, like there's an industry around this, and we're like, what the hell? And then we started to see like the inbound requests come through to you, like, holy shit, like there's real buyers there. You want to talk a little bit? I know, Mark, we can talk a little bit about Mark, but it's like, who else, reached out to you, and did anyone else get close?
There was quite a few leads in a short period of time, and they were all pretty qualified. Even the ones that left after one discussion were still very serious. So I think there was whatever you guys did a great job in getting the leads. It was magic, yeah. And 4 or 5 wanted to move into financials. And like I said, I wasn't really prepared where I had set up and already ran all kinds of numbers, so on and so forth. I had some rough sense of a number of what I wanted based on, my financials. But I ran my company for tax savings, not for building value. So there was a lot of, things in there, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of stuff that I wanted that they had no value. So I had to put, all of a sudden these people are like, can you send financials? And I'm like, well, I didn't tell them, but I was like, I got to pull a lot of shit out of there to make you see the real numbers. Because even the bullcrap numbers were pretty good. Mm-hmm. But when you take out all the things that I bought and things I ran through that were all legit, legally IRS stuff, it was all legally legit, it was a better number. So I was running around trying to put together the right package to make my number make sense in the multiplier of EBITDA. And nobody seemed to be not interested because of the price. We went down from 6, 7 that were semi-interested to 4 that took numbers, and then whittled it down to, Mark, and pursued a process with him. And at that time, another competitor, which I won't mention, a big guy, he actually called and wanted to buy, Unco, but he wanted it slightly different. I was already in negotiations with Mark. He wanted us just to produce, and he would take all the product and put it in his label, which was a bigger label than ours. He's got tons of potted soils and so on and so forth, but he didn't have a pure worm casting. So we had a big discussion, and I asked Mark, if I could talk to him, mainly to learn more about him for Mark, because Mark was pretty committed at that time. He was just waiting on all of his money. So I created a relationship with him, and Mark was he said, well, I'm a little nervous that you're talking to this guy, but I guess I trust you already. And I said, I'm under contract with you indirectly. If you come up with your money, it's yours. He says, yeah, but now you have less incentive because you might have this other deal. I said, don't worry about it. I'm going to talk to him whether you agree or not. I'm just talking to him. Mm-hmm. He's already called me, and I'm going to call him back. And the guy was serious. The guy had money. And I think he may still be a lead that, Mark pursues. We've already talked about it at some point. When Mark starts to increase production, this guy could be an avenue.
Talk a little bit about sort of the trust, because you mentioned there, like you're like, Mark, you already trust me. You guys kind of started to build the formations of a relationship. How did you guys build sort of trust through that process?
We met early on, and I get a sense of people. I know how to read them, and I've met a lot of people, sold consulting service for many years. And I think Mark knows how to read people and got a sense. Matter of fact, our first meeting, I brought my 5-year-old with me because I was babysitting. Mark liked that,
Did you guys meet at the factory? Or
we met at some restaurant halfway between his house and mine. Mm-hmm. And Mark then eventually came to the office, but he only came to the building one time before he bought the business. Now, when I bought that building, before I even bought it, I spent probably 100 hours in there, sitting in there thinking, envisioning how I would lay it out. Does it work? I had the key. I could go whenever I wanted. Visited it 1,000 times at 100 hours, probably more.
Yeah.
Before I ever bought it. So I was a little surprised that he was only in there once.
He read you though. Maybe I think he was just looking at you as the key to the whole thing. And so you guys met once at a restaurant, and then he came to the factory once, and I assume you guys had a bunch of meetings throughout.
Yeah, we talked a lot on the phone. I think it's just a sense, and I believe he said something to me like after it was done, he said, I was expecting some surprises of things that maybe weren't exactly, as good as you said they were. He said, but damn, I've been doing it now 45 days and there ain't no surprises. Everything is pretty much what you said. And I said, well, why wouldn't it be? So that was good that, he's happy with it. Because naturally my kids are still involved, and and that was a big deal for him.
Yeah, talk a little bit about both TJ and Annie's roles in the company, kind of when they came in, and kind of how you thought about like keeping the business going with them involved as you transitioned out.
I mean, it wasn't my goal to kids work for me. I didn't want the stress of are they working hard enough? Are they smart enough? Blah, blah, blah. So I never really thought of that. But as I got older and one of my key people, had an issue and had to leave, then I thought maybe, my son's already successful. Maybe he's interested. And talked to him, and that's when he came aboard as, assisting with a little bit of sales and running the plant and blah, blah, blah. Years later, my operations manager had been with me forever, had a serious health issue, and she had to leave. And my daughter, who just graduated college a year earlier with a math degree, said she was interested in a job. Well, she had worked for the company for a little bit of time when she was going to college, and she didn't really show a whole hell of a lot of ambition, so I remember when she said she was interested, I was kind of reluctant, and I was saying things like, it's not a job, it's a career, it's you
your
got to
life.
eat it and live it and drink it and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I can do it. I'd worked for it before. I said, well, eventually she squeezed it out of me, and I said, you're a little bit lazy. And she said, I'm not lazy. I just was less committed because it was just some part-time little thing. And I know what it takes to do it. I've seen you've been doing it. I've lived with you for it. I can do this. And I said, well, TJ has an opportunity, so I can't say no. And she turned out to be better than the secretary I had that I thought was great, and has done a wonderful job. And even Mark, is loving both of the jobs that they're doing. So
I think that Mark has mentioned that a big factor in him being very interested is that TJ and Annie continue on in the company, and they have equity,
right.
And they kind of go through that. I
think it's better for Mark that it was family more than key people. I mean, I think he would have been willing, if he liked the key people, to go forward even if it wasn't my family, but it was more enticing to him that it was family. That I'm believing it enough and it's good enough company that my kids are involved and that they want to stay involved and own a percentage of it.
When you look back over the 30 or 40 years of building Unco, are there particular really high point moments that you think about? And are there particular low point moments that are sort of etched in your memory on either side?
Even when I was not making a lot of money, I expected to not be making a lot of money. But there was a low point when I created my first label. And it was called Fertile Right, and I had one size bag and one of these pictures. Fertile Right.
Fertile Right.
And it was 2-color bag, green and white. And I went out and talked to some local garden centers, and they were like, "You have one size and one product," and no, we're not interested, and got 5, 6, 7, 8 no's. I remember kind of coming home and feeling like, man, maybe I'm in the wrong business. I can't sell this shit. And it was a pretty low point that I was stressed for
this is early
a few
on.
hours. Yeah, early into the.
You're only stressed
process.
for a few hours.
Yeah, you had to get over it pretty quick. Maybe a whole night that I might have lost some sleep. So that was a low point. That was not a long-term low point, but it was definitely hit me.
But maybe to your the thing that we were talking about with sales, that was like a kill. That was like you got to a decision point there.
All right. They almost killed me,
Yeah.
But again, you went back to reality. Numbers were numbers, and you just got to talk to more people, take what they told you, and grow from it. And eventually, we created a 6, 7-color label. Started doing more of it. Did some mailings at bulk mail. Things slowly, moved on.
Let's talk a little bit about your mindset when you were okay, because we kind of touched on this earlier, but it was okay, I want to sell the business.
Physically, I have psoriatic arthritis, and it's affecting my energy levels up to a bit. I was semi-burned out of doing it
for 49 years, I think.
49 years.
Yeah.
And timing was right. Financially, the market, we were the leaders in the industry. Our financials were good. Profits were good, so timing. The kids didn't want to take over big picture.
Yeah, let's talk about that for actually a minute, because that's kind of an interesting dynamic in this whole thing, where it's you have two of your two kids are in the business, basically in the leadership roles for the company, but you didn't give them.
And they were running day to day, and day to day was good, so it was hard to argue with results. Like TJ says, we're 5 times bigger in production than before I came. and sales are expanding. That's not all that
Water.
business is about, and some of the things where we have to continue to be aware of what our competitors are doing. Stay on top of those types of things. They weren't wanting to be as involved in that, and somewhat was hard because they had their other jobs to do. So I decided, that was another factor that played into the decision to be open to selling, a big part of the company and keeping some of the company for them.
And as you kind of go through that, I think it's one of the things you're kind of implicitly saying there's like there are additional growth opportunities or kind of like new avenues and there are things that you want to explore.
And that was a big reason. I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't have the energy to go after. The industry was at a point where it was super ripe. Other players are getting in, trying to take some of our market. There's some of them are semi-professional guys now. Matter of fact,
do you define your market as like earthworm casting specifically, or is it like all organic?
Earthworm castings,
Okay.
and we have a couple other products that are Wiggle Worm Plus, which has some of the worm cocoon mixture in it. Raised bed mix, which is more of the waste product that is still a good product. We have a tea, but primarily they're all based in worm castings. Our potting soil that's coming out will have worm castings in it, and now the label Wiggle Worm is a big, well-known label. So when you have one product that people love, you want to bring on a bunch of other products because they're automatically going to try them because they love your label. But many things factored in, and one of them was, too, that I didn't have the energy to go after, being more production, managing that, and, creating, new markets and new products and so on and so forth. I wanted the kids to help me do that, but they had their jobs and they were pretty committed to them. So I wanted to look for somebody who wanted to expand the company and go after some of those things. And, still has me involved as a consultant to be able to, pick my brain and take some of my ideas. So that was a big part of it. It was I couldn't stand around. I couldn't stand it by not letting my company that I built, go after some of these opportunities, even if it wasn't, all mine anymore.
So it was really, kind of as I hear you talk about that, it was really important that you found the exact right buyer and that you were in the middle of that process.
Yeah.
Because your kids were still involved and because you cared so much about these other opportunities. So I think, I'm going to ask for the shill for Rejigg here. Like, what was it about our process that let you do that?
Rejigg's process was, simple in a sense, that we didn't have to, you weren't negotiating for us. We were able to do everything ourselves. You put a little information about us on your site. People contacted us, and we did all the negotiating, and it didn't cost me anything. And they did great. We got tons of good leads, pretty quickly. I was surprised, but it just fit that we didn't have to go through a fancy legal situation and have them negotiate our deals, and talk to all the buyers. We were able to do it ourselves. It was, a great platform to be able to get buyers and sellers together.
Thank you, Tom. I think it's like the founding ethos for this business is like anybody who's built a business that's interesting enough to attract a buyer, they've figured out everything along the way to do this sales process on their own. They just need to put it together in this one.
I think it's going to be, continue to grow and be the future of the way people do it. I mean, the people that I know in business, they don't, when they sell their company, they want to be involved. They want to do what I did. And they don't want these big fancy firms that are taking 10, 15% and more. And who knows what they're saying to these people. They may be saying stuff that isn't 100% true, that's expanded, just to make the sale. And now all of a sudden you got legal issues because your agent made a mistake that maybe was a mistake, or he fluffed it. That's another thing that's taken out of the scenario because, now
From the
you're
horse's
in
mouth.
control. Right.
And if you were going to give some advice to like someone else who's thinking about this process, like what would you tell another business owner who's thinking about selling?
I would definitely tell them that to use your company. Everything from day one has been great. From your salespeople, they were working hard, following up the lead, but they weren't pushy. And the things they said were going to happen at the next level happened. They got my information online quickly when people had questions about stuff, and I was pretty naive to what was even online about my company. So I'd have to say, did you put that online? Is that online? Because the guy's asked this question, I don't know what's online. Well, you can go online. I'm like, yeah, I could, but is that online? So
Our process came to you.
Right, they're very helpful, and with somebody who maybe was stubborn and didn't, want to go online, and even the financial part when we started listing things online, it was nervous, but they were able to, soothe my nervousness by the things that they were doing to protect, the data and so on and so forth. So all aspects, just move smoothly, and people were there as if you were the only client, and everybody. So you like that personal attention. At least I did.
I think Sam did a great job. We'll have to connect you guys. Maybe we'll come out here and play golf next
There
time.
you go.
We're out here in the summer. So we've talked a lot about you're kind of alluding to a lot of the demand side here. There's kind of these two big sort of like demand pools you're selling into. One is fishing, and the other is really like fertilizer and organic and soil and doing this sort of garden work. How does Unco fit into this? I know that. What does it mean to be a worm farm or a worm factory? Like what actually happens? And we'll get a bunch of shots of this tomorrow, but like what does that actually mean?
The process when we started was, a different process. Beds, windrows, no real controls, and so on and so forth. We spent a couple of years putting together what we refer to as the Unco System. And that's a controlled process where we take a certain amount of worms, put them into a certain amount of bedding, control the temperatures, the moistures.
And bedding is just like
bedding is
organic
what they're going
stuff.
to eat, so we call it bedding, which is a mixture of 7 different grains, some spent compost material that is their base bedding. Mix the two together. The grains help give us induced growth and hopefully better production and activity.
And they're in these big, like, I'm imagining these big gallon tubs with
they're
a lid
big
on them.
bins. They're roughly 4 foot by 2 foot, bins of 1 foot high. You have to be careful not to go too deep because your bedding can start becoming gaseous if you go with a deeper, material, and the worms won't work that soil that deep. So there's a lot of science behind it that is not obvious, to get results.
How many bins do you have kind of like cooking or working at the same time?
There's probably 700 to 800 bins in production, and then another 150 in the hatch, which all these worms are laying eggs, cocoons, that we pull away from them. And then based on your production goal, you save eggs from a very small percentage of the worms that you're actually have in stock to keep creating more worms so you can sell the older ones and replenish them with newer ones.
There's a lot of this stuff that goes into founding the business and growing it to get to this point. There's a lot of this manual work that goes into it. How did you get comfortable with Mark kind of coming in and, he's been to the factory once. I'm going to guess he didn't go and like actually do the manual work of moving earthworms around. How did you get comfortable with him kind of stepping into this role?
I mean, from conversations, not really telling him what you think, that you might want and how the company grows in your vision. Information is power, and the less you give and the more you get, the better off you are. And in the early stages, I didn't give a lot of info. I was trying to see if he's the right guy. So if I say I want to expand this way and this way and this way, and then say, what do you think? Oh yeah, I'm going to expand it this way and this way too. So if you ask him and make him answer first, or hope he answers first, then you get a sense if it's fitting what you think is the right way to do.
To owners who are thinking about selling their business, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them? How do you think they should approach that? What should they look out for? What should they learn along the way? And then on the other side, people like Mark or TJ who are thinking about maybe buying a business or thinking about striking out on their own.
Yeah.
What are sort of maybe the things that you kind of learn along the way, or the piece of advice you'd give them?
I think it's two questions. So dealing with the one, what would I suggest to people that are looking to start a business? The biggest and first thing would be realize that it's more than a job, that it's, you have to be excited about it. You have to enjoy what you're doing. When I started, being young and never having a boss, I wrote down, what I needed done for the week and every day on a clipboard. And my clipboard became my boss. And it was just developing habits that I can't leave until I've finished the things that I need to do. And those things were on the clipboard and decided earlier. So that became, and I even called it the boss on top of the clipboard. And over time, that developed a work ethic. I don't know if I had that ethic or if I developed it, but I was worried that, because when you own your own company, you love golf. You can go golf all friggin' day if you want. You may not last in business long, but no one's stopping you. So again, you have to enjoy it and realize that when you don't have a boss, you're your own boss, and it's important to make sure that you understand you have to get things done, boss or no boss. Also realize that it's a rare thing to be successful. And there's different types of businesses. There's franchises you can buy that basically you're buying a job. McDonald's, you don't have to really do much besides flip the burgers and order the food and so on and so forth, and you leave. So compared to, say, my business where you're manufacturing a product and shipping it all over the country and trying to package it and compete with others. So know what you're getting into. Know that it's a limited, few people that succeed. Statistically, you're going to be one of the 7 out of 10 that quit, fail, whatever the word is. But find something that you enjoy and believe in yourself. The other side of it, once you decide, when do you want to sell? I struggled with it for a while. I had a lot of calls with people trying to sell me, their service and charge a fee, and we'll negotiate the deal and we'll find the people and so on and so forth. And didn't like that, didn't want that. So again, some people might like that. You got to decide when you're selling, do you want someone else to do it, or would you like to do it yourself? Every business is different, and I didn't need to sell it for my retirement. Everything came together, and finally, I made the decision on the kids that, it was their last opportunity to step up and do what I wanted them to do, and they chose not to. So it wasn't like I said, okay, I'm going to sell it. I just started doing it, and as I started and saw that it was real, then I said, I'm in the process of, I'm starting to sell 80% of the company, and you guys can have 10 and 10, and told them a little bit more about money, and they didn't put up a big fuss, surprisingly, but I tried to get at their inner feelings as to, is there something you're not saying, and didn't really get anything out of them. So either they're still holding that in and they hate me,
or they're good with
or they are somewhat happy. And I think they're happy. They even, like Annie said the other day, I asked her a question about Mark's books or something, and she's like, "That's none of your business. It's not your company."
Get out,
and
Dad.
Stuff. And I'm not going to give you that info. And I'm like, "Yeah, you go, girl." So our company, and she was like, "Our company. Don't ask me questions about my company." And so it's good to see, so they're excited to be, building it with Mark.
Tom, thank you so much for the time today. Learned a ton.
Welcome. Thanks for what you guys did for me.
Of course. It's been a fascinating conversation. Do you want to show me these cars?
If you want to, sure.